Born at Punayur in Kerala on 31st March 1934 to V.M. Nair and Balamani Amma, one of the most eminent Malayalam poets, Kamala Das started writing fiction in her mother tongue at a very early age under the pseudonym Madhavikkutty. She was married off at the age of 15 to a man 14 years her senior. She has 3 sons and several grandchildren. According to Dr. Devendra Kohli, Kamala Das's love poems are a critique of male-dominated culture at odds with women's psychological needs. While she empathizes with the rebel, she also recognizes and celebrates her own femininity and her rootedness in her landscape and her matrilineal tradition. A woman of rare courage and strong convictions, she has always lived by those convictions, the most controversial being her conversion to Islam after the death of her husband Madhav Das, a household name in Kerala. She has authored nearly 1,500 stories that are contained in over 50 collections, some of which have been translated into nearly 30 Indian and foreign languages. After the publication of Summer in Calcutta in 1965, which heralded the emergence of a major new voice on the Indian English literary scene, Kamala Das has altogether published 5 collections of poetry, 2 story collections, 2 novellas, and a highly controversial autobiography, My Story, in English. Kamala Das has also received various citations, honors, and awards for her pioneering work in Kerala and for her writings both in Malayalam and English, including the coveted Sahitya Academy Award. The University of Calicut also recently conferred on her an honorary D.Litt for literature.
I don't know politics, but I know the names of those in power and can repeat them like days of week or names of months, beginning with Nehru. I am Indian, very brown, born in Malabar. I speak 3 languages, write in 2, dream in 1. Don't write in English, they said. English is not your mother tongue. Why not leave me alone, critics, friends, visiting cousins, every one of you? Why not let me speak in any language I like? The language I speak becomes mine. Its distortions, its queernesses, all mine, mine alone. It's half English, half Indian. Funny perhaps, but it is honest. It's as human as I am human. If I had been a loved person, I wouldn't have become a writer. I would have been a happy human being. I would write about the calm. I would write about happiness and a lovely love life. To want to live so that it would be incentive for life. But there is always a new personality. There is regrowth. You know, you set fire to a forest, but later there will be movement in the undergrowth. You will see worms coming up, erupting from the slushy earth. You will see seeds sprout, become trees. You will see bird nests again. You will see the flowers again. So I believe in that. This circle, when I believe in the impermanence of things, I also believe in the permanence of life.
There is hardly any kind of relationship that she has not dealt with in her fiction, especially women in their various positions and states and relations with men and other women and society in general. Nobody else in Malayalam and perhaps in other Indian languages also has dealt with such intensity and such deep insight these relationships as Kamala Das has done. So her protagonists, mostly female, come from different walks of life. She has a wonderful story, for example, on a child prostitute, a doll for a child prostitute, it is called in English translation, and in Malayalam, Rukminikku Pavakkutty, which deals with the pangs and the anxieties of a prostitute who was just 11 or 12 years old. And it is this gradual expansion of compassion that that makes Kamala one of the finest and the greatest writers of our time, other than of course her language, which is chiseled, filtered, transparent.
And I just watched the child play, two children play outside the brothel. And then I saw the madam of the house coming from the top of the stairs calling her, Rukmini, because a client had come with a newspaper hiding his face. So she went up. She said, don't shift that. They were playing with a piece of brick, hopscotch. She said, don't shift it, I'll come back. And then she came back. And I thought, how innocent they are. How destroyed they are, destroyed by us. She could be my daughter. When I was about 17, I published a story using that name because I didn't want my grandmother to read the story and get a bit shocked. My grandmother was a Puritan and this was a love story. So I used the name Madhavikkutty. Madhavi, Madhava's wife, and Kutty because I was only a child. Then I published it and I think it was regarded as a good story, and my mother's uncle, who is a writer, who used to be very famous, he praised the story and he said, keep it up. And he said, your pen name is beautiful. And after that there was no stopping me. I would write a story for Mathrubhumi every month. I would get 12 rupees per story. I write about the poor mainly and the disadvantaged. I've written about the hermaphrodites living in Kolivada, Bombay. And my story on a prostitute, child prostitute, was made into a movie in Malayalam called Rukmini by a very able director, K.P. Kumaran. Such people I write about because they are voiceless. They scream, but we don't hear their screams. They're screaming from around me, little maid servants who get beaten up, 12-year-olds carrying pails of water. I've seen, they don't even get a salary. I take leave of you, fair city, while tears hide somewhere in my adult eyes, and sadness is silent as a stone in the river's unmoving core. It's goodbye, goodbye, goodbye to slender shapes behind window panes, shut against indiscriminate desire and rain, to yellow moons so long ignored, so long unloved, to the birds flesh hungry, circling in the sky with shrill and hostile cries, to the crowd near the sea, walking or sitting, but always talking, talking, talking. I take leave of you, fair city. Keep your tears, your anger, and your smile for others. Young, who come with unjaded eyes, give them your sad-eyed courtesans with tinsel and jasmine in their hair, your marble slabs and morgues, your brittle roadside laughter. It's goodbye, goodbye, goodbye to the silence and the sounds, to streets that I never walked but in dreams, to lips that I never kissed but in dreams, to children lovely as flowers out of me, never born. I suppose I began writing because I had some weaknesses in my system. I felt I was weak and vulnerable, and I think that's why we attempt poetry, because poets are like snails without the shells, terribly vulnerable, so easy to crush. Of course, it's given me a lot of pain. Each poem really born out of pain, which I would like to share. But then you look for that person, the sharer of your pain, and you don't find him anywhere. It's the looking that makes a poet go on writing, the search. And I suppose if you find someone, Search is over, poetry is over.
I read A Summer in Calcutta, the first book by Kamala Das in 1965, and I was really struck by it. Some of the poems have still remained in my mind. Some of them have become classics, like the introduction. I particularly liked the dance of eunuchs, where the imagery was very vibrant and colorful. She wrote very easily, without any rhyme scheme, any particular rhythm, 10 syllables or 8 syllables per line, nothing of the sort. And it was obvious that she had a natural gift. After A Summer in Calcutta, the other books that I read, Descendants, and she wrote collected poems which came out, where she had also poems on the Tamils and their fate in Sri Lanka. So they were more politically oriented, but nothing was as fresh or as fragrant as A Summer in Calcutta. She has remained a steady influence on all the other women poets. No one was as bold as she was to start with, and her shadow can be seen in the poems of our best women writers, Eunice D'Souza, Rukmini Bhai Nair, and all the other women poets who have followed.
For me, the landmark woman Indian poet after independence was definitely Kamala Das. And that is why in my first book of poems, The Hyoid Bone, I wrote a long poem, an extended poem on modern English poets. And note that I called the poem Modern English Poets, not Indian women poets, not Indo-Anglian poets, but modern women poets. And in that poem, I referred to Kamala Das's poetry as the world after summer rain. And it was because in her poetry, you had the kind of fresh view of what a woman's predicament is. And this is why I think she was a really important voice. Her voice had a kind of grittiness, a kind of intensity, which was associated with consciousness. I think with a consciousness which cannot be ignored. Kamala Das cannot be ignored.
What is this drink but the April sun, squeezed like an orange in my glass? I sip the fire, I drink and drink. Again, I am drunk, yes, but on the gold of suns. What noble venom now flows through my veins and fills my mind with unhurried laughter. So I suppose by writing poetry, we are forming a kind of crust over us, over the essence, the essential self. But even then, I think like breaking the back of a cockroach at night, walking, without knowing, people unwittingly crush our backs, crush our egos at night. They walk around crushing us. It's a sad occupation, but I wouldn't choose another.
Kamala Das is a pioneer in Indian English poetry. She broke free from the earlier metaphysical and romantic traditions and gave to Indian English poetry a new lease of life. In her use of imagery, in her use of themes, her protests, her reflections of feminisms in her poetry, it created a new trend that was later followed up by many other poets like Gauri Deshpande. But this new lease of life that she injected into Indian English poetry has often been misinterpreted. She has fallen on the thorns of life, as it were, and bled. Yes, definitely bled. Her poetry is not always erotic. She has been hailed as the queen of erotica, but she has also been hailed as a poetic pilgrim. So her name has has really oscillated between wide poles, which shows the genius of her poetry.
When we were children, my brother and always playing on the sands, drawing birds and animals, our great-grandmother said one day, "You see this house of ours, now 400 years old. It's falling to little bits before our very eyes. The walls are cracked and torn and moistened by the rains. The tiles have fallen here and there. The windows whine and groan, and every night the rats come out of holes and scamper past our doors." I want to be a good mother to all the characters in my story. A lot of love flowing into my literature, into poetry, stories.
Madhavikkutty or Kamala Das has always been a very enigmatic kind of presence and absence, both together within Kerala and outside Kerala. I personally feel that Madhavikkutty or Kamalasurayya's work is important, very important, precisely because it negotiates the vexed territory of the human mind with great elan. I would say it is important precisely because it somehow is not afraid to look divisions straight in the face. And when I say divisions, I mean divisions within, internecine conflicts, tensions, dichotomies, ambiguities. You find such dichotomies in abundance in her work. And this is new as far as Malayalam literature is concerned. Mid-20th century Malayalam literature, especially short fiction, gets a real break with this kind of a very brave kind of a attempt to deal with the impossible questions of the human soul. This is why I think her work is very important. She could be very local, very culture specific, and at the same time reach out to a broader world. She could be very passionate and at the same time be sort of bristling with fear. There is a typical Kamala Das entity in terms of her poetry, and there's a typical Madhavikkutty entity in terms of her short fiction.
Ultimately, I have come face to face with the sea. In the beginning, the sea was only the wind's ceaseless whisper in a shell. But lying beside my grandmother, quite often I thought that I could hear at night the surf breaking on the shore. The sea was only 2 miles away. That was long ago. I don't think I have been a feminist writer, because the kind of feminism I get acquainted with annoys me, because there's kind of hostility towards men. I can't understand it. To regain your balance, you need to love. And love means a bit of surrender. I think a woman is most attractive when she surrenders to her man. My husband asked me to write the autobiography when I was 37. And I was very ill, lying in the Bombay hospital, room number 565. And that was the time. An editor had come visiting, and he told my husband that he'll pay my hospital bills. So a typewriter was brought into the room, and because of the pain I could not sleep, so whole night I would type. That's how it began. But everybody expected me to die, including Dr. Goel who had treated me. Goel was the heart specialist. But after about 4 years, I saw him at a party, and he said, "A ghost who walks, Kamala Das, you're alive," and glowing. I was glowing with health. I've been lucky. Dying, resurrecting myself over and over again. So I think the autobiography was written, and later I should have regretted the writing of it because I threw in a bit of fiction to thicken it, because by itself my life was not strong enough for a book.
For a generation of women writers who had been fed on the well brought up prose of Nayantara Sehgal or Kamala Markande, who were very genteel, let us say, and never shocked anybody, and you never suspected that behind their unruffled prose there was any hurt, pain, or of a sexual nature. Suddenly you had Kamala Das with her very vibrant personality, which at a time when celebrity writing hadn't become such a burden and cross as it is now, her persona overtook her writing in the public mind. But when you did read her, it was so refreshing and so vibrant that I think, beginning with myself, a whole generation of writers, women writers, took sustenance from her. Kamala Das was a very effective, very, in her way, sparse yet sensual writer. And somebody whose very serious writing was hijacked by a press that sensationalized her hungrily and quite omitted to look at her as a literary figure. She was completely without a sense of shame about her body when she wrote. And at a time when India was still deeply mired in marital hypocrisies, she could talk as a human being, as many people have done before her and after her. But at that moment, she became misunderstood, I feel, as a writer, and diminished. I think her prose is very effective, very spare, very sensual at the same time, which is a difficult balancing act. And it has a lot of depth. And also, sexuality and sensuality are metaphors in her for so many other arenas of power equations, of divinity, of mysticism. I think she was a very serious writer who will be re-examined, is being re-examined.
I was child, and later they told me I grew, for I became tall, my limbs swelled, and one or two places sprouted hair. When I asked for love, not knowing what else to ask, he drew a youth of 16 into the bedroom and closed the door. He did not beat me, but my sad woman body felt so beaten. My poetry today, an answer to the question that had plagued me all my life, right from childhood to now. I'm answering. My poetry today gives the answer. No groping around. Nothing can scare me. No ghost in my mansion. Somehow, forever I'm trying to be rid of my past, to unshackle myself so that I move away, farther and farther away from my past. Because I don't think the past was as interesting as the present. I sold my past. I distributed it. I called everybody for the dinner and I said, eat a bit of my past, all of you. Drink a bit of my past. And they drank the wine of my past. And they ate the flesh of my past. And I feel battered, weaker for it.
The interesting thing about Kamala Das for me is that she comes from two traditions. She melds two traditions. When she was young, she read all of the Western classics. She read Maeterlinck and Victor Hugo, and she comes from a brilliant family of scholars, of classical Sanskrit scholars, of her granduncle was the translator into Malayalam of Victor Hugo. Her mother is one of the greatest poets in India. So these two traditions came together to make a kind of a writing that was free in a way that most writers can't be, and sophisticated, profoundly sophisticated, and yet told in a voice that's so accessible and so moving and touching that it can reach me across the sea. The other thing is that her words, her metaphors, because she is such a true poet, not cluttered with computers or tape recorders or technology, but true in her mind to poetry. Those words come out of her even as you're being friendly with her and talking normally. And those words jolt me, and they bring me to another space. They make me transcend my mundane self. And when they do that, they give me joy. There are many Kamala Dasses, and I guess the one that I identify with, or the one that I like to think of when I think of her, is the Kamala Das that wrote this poem. It's called A Blessed Life, and that's interesting because often she says she has a hard life. True, I broke a commandment or two, but I shall not plead for society's pardon or God's. When I disobeyed, I tasted bliss. Indeed, I count myself blessed, not for the fame or fortune, but for those wanton hours of pure abandon.
I'm trying to hold on to the innocence of my earlier days. I was told once by my grandmother, "You can't trust strangers, please don't trust them." And then suddenly I have come to realize that society holds only strangers for me, and I have been trusting them. So it's a damaged view that I have now. But then I suppose if I hadn't had this exposure to vice and cruelty, I would not have lived as a poet. I would have made an excellent professor of English. When I die, do not throw the meat and bones away, but pile them up and let them tell by their smell what life was like on this earth, what love was worth in the end.